Welcome to another edition of Around with Randall, your weekly podcast on making your nonprofit more effective for your community. And here is your host, the CEO and founder of Hallett Philanthropy, Randall Hallett.
I can't tell you how much of an honor it is to have you join me for this edition of Around with Randall. Every once in a while, you're at a conference, you're at a gathering, and you're thinking, maybe this isn't something I need to be paying as much attention to. It doesn't apply to me quite as much. And then you actually decide to listen and you walk away going, okay, that was amazing. And that's exactly what happened to me, as I am incredibly fortunate to be a invited and accepted member of the Giving Institute, which is the partner with the Lilly School, Giving USA, the tracking of philanthropy data in the United States. We're at our annual conference. And it was kind of a last minute fill-in. A friend of mine, an incredibly well-respected colleague, was responsible for making sure the program ran, and he needed a substitute. And he brought in a group to talk about corporate giving. I don't do a lot in corporate giving other than just some basic things. And what I found when they got done was I was taking notes like crazy. And I want to share some of these things that I think are really important in terms of our corporate giving efforts. But then also the tactical is, what can you do with this information to make your corporate giving, and maybe more importantly, where it fits into the largesse of your overall philanthropy? How do we make it more effective? So let's start with what we heard. I want to give credit to the Sartell Institute, which is a interesting organization. They are one that gathers in a local community CEOs and brings them together to talk about community interests. And the CEOs obviously have, as head of corporations, a corporate mentality when it comes to their philanthropy on behalf of the organization. And they spoke. Now they're building out a model. They've been in Philadelphia for a while and I think have done very well. I think they're looking at other markets to grow into and continue this kind of discussion to bring collaborative philanthropy from the corporate perspective to your local community. A couple places they're starting, obviously, as I mentioned, Philly was at the top. They talked about this from both a historical standpoint, but what's going on today. When we think about corporate philanthropy as a whole, is that when we go back in time, when we think about corporations and after just coming out of and after the Industrial Revolution, it really was one person who drove the philanthropy. So when you talk about the steel industry, which is really only one company, U.S. Steel, it's Andrew Carnegie. Well, Andrew Carnegie made the decisions for philanthropy, particularly after he sold it, for U.S. Steel. John D. Rockefeller, when you talk about Standard Oil, or Henry Ford, when you talk about the Ford Corporation and automobiles. These were one-person decisions, maybe two, in how they did it. And it really, in times, wasn't done through the corporation. Maybe it was done after they've sold it, or they were giving stock, or things of that nature. In the 1900s, in the early part of the 20th century, when we have this era, it's estimated that about, in terms of numbers, that they would look at, because they got deductions and we had a huge transitional change after 1913 and 16 with the changes to the Constitution and doing income tax, and then tax and corporation tax, that they were doing about 30% of their net revenue was going to philanthropy in some way, shape, or form, particularly with the Depression, that a lot of times the stabilization of a city in the Depression, basic services, food, housing, just basic necessities, corporations were being asked to do an immense amount to be able to facilitate this. I think about the story that I got from my dad and my grandfather, about my great-grandfather owning a jewelry store in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they wanting to build the football stadium. He owned a jewelry store, and they kept coming back to him. We buy more tickets. We need corporations to do this. There was a mentality that the corporate responsibility was local in some way, shape, or form, and you had a few bigger conglomerates, but most corporations were smaller. So it was about 30%. And then we get to the 1950s, and we have this huge change in leadership, which I write in my book, Vibrant Vulnerability, about how there was this perceptual change of CEOs, and with that change of philanthropy and where corporations fit in. It actually dropped from 30% in the early part, pre-World War II to about 6% of pre-tax revenue in the 1950s, 60s, and moving into the 70s. And this was all about not one person, but the organization satisfying two entities. Their stakeholders and stockholders, one entity. The owners, people who bought stock. We had a huge growth in the public nature of corporations. Number two was the local community in which the corporate headquarters or the largest pieces of the corporation were located. That's what drove it. And if you might have some connection loosely in a smaller community, they weren't going to give to you. Or unless you had a stockholder that could walk in the room or somebody on the corporate board and say, look, we need to be prioritizing this. Their philanthropy was very standardized. Universities, some healthcare, better communities overall, a lot of parks, a lot of a growth of, infrastructure in terms of not streets, but things that go along with great communities. This continued for probably about 40, 50 years, began a shift into the 2000s into where we are today. And now in the 1990s, we saw corporation giving drop to 2% of pre-tax with the same emphasis towards the bottom line, stakeholders and shareholders, to today where it's actually less than 1% of pre-tax. And really what we're talking about today is the CEO's philanthropy that they view, they lead, they see the corporate board, the organizational effort is really based more, they see the pivot towards the employees. One of the greatest challenges, which we all think and talk about, but I'm not sure we think about it from the connection philanthropy, is maintaining and attracting employees. And we're seeing a generational shift at the same time. I'm Generation X, probably more aligned with the baby boomers in terms of my philanthropy. But we know millennials, which is now the largest generation, and absolutely Generation Z coming after them, are more interested in what's in the global good, not traditional philanthropy like we see in baby boomers and most of Generation X. That my personal belief system has to align with where I work. And part of that is, what's our philanthropy? What are we doing to make the world a better place? Well, at the same time, we're having trouble attracting and maintaining employees. So if we need to keep those employees, then our philanthropy is one way we can show and connect the ability for us to have an idea of a satisfied retention process. One of the things we can do is give employees more input when it comes to the corporate philanthropy. And it's not just about what's for the best interest of the stakeholders. They make their money on the investment side. What we're talking about is how we up that particular outcome through philanthropy and employee engagement. I think it's also important to note that, as I mentioned, it dropped to 1% pre-tax, lowest we've ever had it, that there's less money at stake. So they're using it for the corporate best interest, which is employees. I frame this, not that you wanted a history lesson today, and I apologize for the 7 or 8 minutes that I've done this, but I think there's some interesting trends in it because now it gets into the tactical. What are we going to do about it? Well, you can't understand the recommendations until you understand the history. Because if you're doing corporate philanthropy like you did 30 years ago, you're not going to find the results that you want. So the first thing to say is that I've always believed this, always preached this, taught this. Corporate philanthropy is not about the application. Number one, the first tactical solution. It is about still a personal touch. You need to know who are the points of entry. I didn't say what are the points of entry. I said who are the points of entry. People accept applications. People are the entry point for conversations. They get a lot of people, a lot of organizations coming to them saying, would you give to us? And if you're looking for more than $500 to play in the golf for them, you probably want a personal relationship with someone and begin to ask questions. What do you value? What have you done in the past? What's your process? What's your timeline? What are the ranges? What's the application look like? What are you all looking for when you make these decisions? Who's making these decisions? All too often, I have people that I hear say, we submitted to one of our largest corporations. We didn't get any money. I'm like, well, did you make a phone call? No. Did you talk to anybody? No. Do you know anybody? No. Did you ask what's interest of them? You've heard me talk in podcasts constantly over the last year and a half. Quit talking at people, talk with people, ask them what's important to them. Same is true of corporations. So the first thing is create a dossier on a corporation, but don't create it just on the corporation. Create it on the people who are part of the philanthropy decision-making process. Who are they? What do they believe? What are their passions? What are their communication choices? Corporations aren't just nebulous clouds. They're made up of people, and people make these decisions. Number two, because of this displacement, we've gone to a remote work environment. So I talked about here in kind of the historical piece that it's about keeping employees. Well, as we moved into the remote work environment, that's meant that more employees are dispersed into different places. And that also means, according to the Sartell Institute, that corporate leaders wanting to find ways of engaging the community don't just look at it as their community anymore, being where the corporate headquarters are. It's where the employees are. So my father-in-law lives in Atlantic, Iowa, about an hour outside of Omaha. And what we've noticed is there's been an intake of people. Well, when you talk to these people, they're now remote working from Los Angeles and from Detroit and my father-in-law is fascinated by this because it's not the world he grew up in, but he's like, they're working every day, 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 or whatever with a group of people that aren't anywhere near Atlantic, Iowa. Well, if a key employee lives in Atlantic, Iowa, and they wanted to retain and maintain that relationship, the corporation with that person, that employee, maybe they'd be interested in the philanthropy in Atlantic, Iowa, where that gift could be possible. This all goes to say you need to identify local leaders, local connections. Even if the corporation is headquartered way over there, who are the people? The more the people you have locally, the better the opportunity you have probably to influence some decision-making in corporate philanthropy. And Sartell Institute talked about this constantly. Like, we just think of, well, they're in Philadelphia. Yeah, but if they've got a whole bunch of people living in Omaha, maybe they have more of an interest in Omaha because they want their people to be interested in Omaha. So identify those local leaders. Number 3, think beyond your needs. One of the things that we see, and I saw this, one of the people that I have immense respect for as a philanthropist when I took the job at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, told me that this very concept, this would be 15 years ago, 17 years ago, not quite 15 years ago. And he said, everybody keeps wanting money from the same people, but they don't think about it, what we want to accomplish as the community leaders. And this is a major philanthropist, major community leader. And so I always position that in my head. And now I heard it again at this presentation. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about that'll make more sense. Of a client, they're doing a particular capital campaign project. We've run into some delays because of things that aren't actually in the fault of philanthropy, but we have to deal with them. And we're repositioning this. People are like, well, why would I give to that? I'm not interested in that. The organization's had a couple issues, and we've learned to pivot because it's a smaller community. It's not 5 million people. This is the largest employer. So this project has effect on the economy. We build this kind of project, it's going to have an immense construction operation go on, which is good for the local community. It's also about keeping jobs, that this will build out a particular area of the organization where they're going to need more people, which means we are now attracting new people into the community. That's healthy. It's a tax base because all of these things, generically, are going to be taxed in some way because they don't have all of the nonprofit, taxable things that some organizations or some states might have. There's a little bit more progressive thought on that in this particular state. So there's tax implications. And they're going to become a destination for a particular issue, which means people are going to come to them, which now affects hotels, restaurants, gas, local sundries from, doing laundry to, you're there for a period of time, going to the park or, going to the movies, doing something different. We began to reposition this, and all of a sudden we got the business leaders to say, oh, this isn't necessarily about just that project, which I'm not sure it applies to me directly, but it's going to do all of these things that affect my business. This is also the type of project that's going to lift the common good. And that means keeping and attracting employees for these individuals. My point is that if you just say, we need this because we need this, like the gentleman, the philanthropist I was telling you about, you miss the point of what's of value to them. Talk with people, not at them. What's your biggest concern? I don't have enough staff. I'm attracting new employees. We're a smaller community, so there's a limited talent base. Look at what we could do to help with those issues. View this in a wider perspective. That's number 3. Number 4, keep corporate philanthropy in a appropriate, proper proportion. I was at another client. We're just beginning the campaign conversations, and one of the board members says, "Well, we should just go all the corporations." I said, "Let's look at the data." And this comes from the Giving Institute. Feel very fortunate to have access to this data. We're now up to about 64% are individuals. I've said since I first loosely got involved with the organization, this isn't a true, accurate statistic. I understand why you track it, because bequests is another 8% who makes those decisions, individuals. The largest growth in foundations and corporations, which is like 18 or 17%, 18, 19%, is DAFs, donor advised funds. Well, who makes those decisions? Individuals. Corporations, 7, 8%, 6, 7, 8%, something of that nature in terms of total philanthropy in the United States. How many people are doing it from a small business perspective, like Hallett Philanthropy? I make the decisions. My wife and I make the decisions on philanthropy through the corporation because it's tax advantage. That counts as a corporate gift. Who's making that decision? Individuals. This is to say that if you think corporations are going to solve all your problems in terms of philanthropy, you're not understanding the numbers. My guess is somewhere between 83 and 87% of all dollars coming into philanthropy are truly being decided by individuals. Individuals per se, coming out of a house or home. Bequests, which are done by individuals, certainly by donor advised funds, and now into corporations. It's a larger percentage. The reason I say that is if you put all your eggs in the corporate basket, you're going to be disappointed. You're not going to get to where you want to go. And so keep it in proper proportion. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying do it proportionally, but concentrate on those individual relationships because that's where the real dollars are. I want to leave you with one final saying that they said, which I totally stole. So I want to give credit to Sartell Group and Institute and their people. But when you think about corporations, think about this. If you know one company, you know one company. Every one of them does it differently. That's why we need to treat them more like individual donors. I talked about this as the number 1, the personal touch. Who are they? What are their decisions? Things of that nature. If you're just throwing in applications, you're going to get the $500 table because they feel obligated, or you're going to get the $1,500 golf sponsorship because they feel obligated. You want real money? You're going to have to do probably the 4 things I talked about, at least 3 of the 4. Number 1 is create that personal touch. Number 2 is look for those local leaders, even if they don't have corporate headquarters locally. Number 3 is think beyond your needs. Think about the greater community, what it means to them in terms of the organization and the community in which they have, obviously, either the staff and or the actual corporation. And number 4, keep it in proportionality so that you're really getting to the dollars that you need for your nonprofit. Interesting hour presentation. Wanted to share a little bit with you from what I heard and give Sartell Institute the credit for the work they're doing, but it was really well done, and hope that this might be helpful to you. Also helpful to you. Okay, check out the blogs at Hallett Philanthropy. 90-second reads. I write all kinds of stuff, what I read, what I see, different thoughts. 90 seconds, get an RSS feed right to your inbox. And if you'd like to reach out to me, don't forget you can do that as well. Comment on this, leave a remark on the wherever you download or watch these particular podcasts, whatever that looks like. communicate with me, podcast@philanthropy.com. We live in a time where philanthropy is playing a larger and larger, greater and greater, bigger and bigger role. This is all about how we make our community a better place. Philanthropy has an important part in that process. What I'm hopeful for in all of this is that you feel like you're making a contribution, that what you do every day has value, even if it's sometimes not all that pleasant. It does make a difference. Remember my all-time favorite saying, some people make things happen, some people watch things happen, then there are those who wondered what happened. What we do is all about making things happen for the people and places that are wondering what happened. And at the end of the day, that has value, which means you have value and what you do has value. Every day you show up to work and every day you care about someone else. Philanthropy isn't about money, it's about love of mankind, love of humankind. That's what we do every single day. I'll look forward to seeing you the next time, right back here on the next edition of Around with Randall. And don't forget, make it a great day.